Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 363, and I'm Jess Root, your host from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. This is still not one of our regular editions, whether our regular episodes. Seth Cox is not with me in this edition of the show. It is the fifth installment of our 6 opponent preview shows, and it is part 2 of our NFC South opponent previews, as we will take a look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons, the Cardinals' Week 16 and Week 17 opponents. So in this edition of the show, I sit down with the managing editors for BucsWire.com and FalconsWire.com. We're going to start off with the Buccaneers, whom they face on Christmas night. That's coming next. All right, next up in our preview set, opponent preview shows or segments, is Luke Easterling, who actually has a ton of hats here over at the NFL Wire Network because he has run the draft side, Draft Wire, and on again, off again, but is now on again over at BucsWire. So he has multiple hats here. I can't remember if, I think this is the first time you have been on for one of the podcast preview shows, because I think did you come on a year or two ago when they faced the Bucs before? I can't, or if I had another.
It probably was someone else. I came back to the BucsWire part of it.
Because I remember Bonnie, but then I don't remember who took over after that.
Oh, geez, who was after Bonnie? I'm gonna lose that. I can't remember who took over for Bonnie. But yeah, I came back in the September, like right before the Brady season, so it's 2020. Because I did BucsWire off and on. I was helping Bonnie out for a little while. And then I left and did Buck stuff for Sports Illustrated for a little while. And then I came back right before that Brady season started. So I've been back at BucsWire since that 2020 season.
But Luke is a friend. Like, Luke's obviously a friend of the show. He's also Seth Cox. Seth Cox, my co-host, knows you pretty well as well in the draft community.
Yes, I know Seth. Yep.
And so glad to have you on as we talk about the Buccaneers, as Tampa Bay will be the Cardinals' opponent on Christmas night at home at State Farm Stadium. Tampa Bay has a lot of Arizona connections still, but what we want to do is kind of go back over this last season, which did not end the way the Bucs wanted it to be. After winning their championship in the 2020 season, they didn't quite make it that far. So, as we look at last season, was it kind of a championship or bust type of scenario, or like how disappointing was it to end short of the Super Bowl?
I mean, it was super disappointing, and I think that if you kind of look at the way things happened after that game, it feels like championship or bust, because I feel like they beat the 49ers in Tampa the next week. And I feel like I like their chances against the Bengals in the Super Bowl too. You know, I think we all knew that the Rams were probably going to be the toughest opponent on that road, especially once, you saw San Francisco with the upset, and that would have given the Bucs home field advantage in that title game. So, it was kind of the opposite of the 2020 season in just about every way, right? The 2020 season, they didn't have a great start. The regular season, again, they were 7-5 at one point, and would then finish so strongly and win 8 games in a row. Still made the playoffs as a wild card. Didn't even win the division, and then obviously the ridiculous playoff run. They go on the road 3 straight weeks. They beat Washington. They beat Drew Brees in his last game in New Orleans and avenge that sweep in the regular season. They go to Green Bay and beat Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau at the NFC Championship, and then obviously the ridiculous dominant win in the Super Bowl. And that was just ridiculous. But again, the regular season was kind of rocky, and it built up to that. Last season was the opposite, right? They set the franchise record for regular season wins. The Bucs had never won 13 games in a regular season. They did that last year. They won the NFC South for the first time in over a decade. So they went into the playoffs and even got a little bit of help there in the last week. They gave them a higher seed and gave them that home field advantage for the first 2 weeks of the playoffs. And they had a big dominant win over the Eagles. Probably could have been a lot worse. It was 31-0 in the third quarter. And they kind of called the dogs off a little bit at the end and made the score not really indicative of how ridiculous that game was. And then the following week, I mean, what can I say? You know, they had home field advantage, everything going for them. And that first half, they just did not show up. They got out-coached. They got outplayed. And they looked really, really bad. They looked unprepared and completely not ready to be on the stage they were on. And it's absolutely a miracle that game came down to the final seconds with, again, you know, a ridiculous comeback by Tom Brady. And a lot of people talk about that comeback and being one of his iconic ones. You're down 27-3 in the late third quarter, and you make that a tie game in the final minutes. But I think people ignore the fact people have been blaming, at least in Buckstown, you know, people are blaming Todd Bowles for that play call at the end that let Cooper Kupp get deep. And obviously he would like to have that one back, but that comeback doesn't happen if his defense doesn't go out and cause turnover after turnover after turnover in the final 20 minutes of that game to keep handing the ball back to Tom Brady over and over and over again for those touchdowns they got at the end. So, I mean, they somehow made that a game at the end, and they almost got the ball back again. I don't know if you remember that, but Matt Stafford fumbled the ball on the first down play in that final drive. Game. And if they had gotten that ball, it would have been over. The Bucs would have kicked the field goal, run the clock out, and won that game. So it was absolutely championship or bust from the beginning. It definitely had that feeling to it. When Leonard Fournette went in for that touchdown and tied the game, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. He's going to do it again. He's going to do it again. And again, just a weird call. It didn't look like the communication was very good. And some people, you know, who were supposed to blitz did too late because they didn't know the call. And there was just too much confusion. And you had, you know, arguably the best receiver in the league one-on-one with a safety, a really good one in Antoine Winfield, but that's still an unfair. And honestly, you know, if you want to get in the weeds about it, people are like, oh, you should have just been, you know, soft coverage again. Well, they ran that on the previous play, and Cooper Kupp beat Sean Murphy-Bunting for like 20 yards and got out of bounds. So if they had done that on the next play, it would have been field goal range anyway. So it's people overreact, I think, a little bit to that play, but the fact that they were even in that game is ridiculous because they played like garbage for most of the first three quarters. So,
the Rams had their season mirrored what the Bucs did the previous year.
Right,
only they ended up winning the division because the Cardinals collapsed. But it was Matthew Stafford's playoff run, and he got the Cinderella story. I felt coming into last season that the Rams were the favorites because of how hard it is to repeat in the league. But man, both teams really all season sort of met every sort of expectations. Tom Brady, who, you know, remember Tom Brady was washed up in like 2016.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And I disliked Tom Brady very much early in his career.
Oh, we all did.
But you know, as I've gotten a little older, I'm like, how could you not like this guy while he's hard to deal with on the field sometimes, he loves football. He loves his teammates. And how often we're never going to see anything like this again? Because even as hard as as great as Patrick Mahomes is, there is almost no way at all that he's going to be able to do what Tom Brady did. And he got more likable. And I rooted for Tom Brady, and especially rooted for the Bucs against the Rams because Rams.
Yeah. And I'll agree with you that it was Matthew Stafford's magical playoff run, but I really hope he sent a very large fruit basket to Jaquiski Tartt for dropping that interception. Because that run doesn't happen if he catches that football. So that was a magical moment.
It was, and I know that Matthew Stafford, like you said before we started recording, we were root for players more than teams. Obviously there are teams I root for, but there are so many players that I respect throughout the league and like to see being successful. And Matthew Stafford's one of them because he reminded me a lot of Carson Palmer. I wish they would have gone out and got Stafford about 2017, 2018. Didn't happen. But yeah, it's good to see a guy who's had a career like that to finally hit the precipice. And I'm just sad because we never do.
That's for sure, man. And and being in doing draft work for as long as I have, there's always somebody on whatever team that wins the Super Bowl that, that I've either had time to interview and speak with and get to know over the years from the scouting process, especially if it's a later round guy that, during the draft process, nobody really knew about. And I got to know that person. So Cooper Kupp is one of those guys. I remember speaking with him at the Senior Bowl and spending time with this guy from Eastern Washington that was like, he's
the son of a former third-string quarterback for the Cardinals. I remember
exactly.
Craig
It
Kupp.
was like it was a plucky little story, right? And then he becomes what he becomes. So it is always fun to be able to root for those stories.
So coming on next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on to the offseason, because the Bucs, it was been an interesting time.
Pretty boring for the Bucs. Not a whole lot of epic storylines.
So, we'll talk more about that coming in next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. The offseason, it looked like the Bucs were going to be making a big transition as Tom Brady. Well, first, it's reported that Tom Brady's going to retire. He says, wait, no, I haven't decided. Then he says, yeah, I'm going to retire. And then a little bit later, he unretires. What was that like in Tampa Bay? Because you went from, okay, we're going to run it back to, oh, crap, we need a quarterback. And you have Bruce Arians talking about, Blaine Gabbert.
Right.
Now, I understand this. Bruce loves his guys. Like there was a special relationship he had with Drew Stanton, and then since 2017 with Blaine Gabbert. I don't necessarily get it, but there is a part of him that, even though Arians has had great success with some of the greatest quarterbacks that there have been in the league, but he loves his backups. Loves them. It's weird.
Yeah. By the way, my favorite Blaine Gabbert story, by the way, is I was in the locker room in 2019. He spent most of that season injured, had a shoulder injury, and didn't play much. But we were in the locker room one day for open locker room and practice. Remember open locker room? Remember when that existed?
Please, let's come back this year. It should be back this year.
We'll tell long stories about that. But I remember being in there, and Blaine is having a very in-depth, animated conversation with the team chef, who would come into the locker room and had this huge slab of steak, some really fancy steak that he was explaining to Blaine, this particular way to cook it, this particular treatment, oh, you need to do this and this and this and this. And I'll just remember Blaine Gabbert literally hanging on every word and taking notes and literally being thank you, chef. Thank you so much, chef. Afterwards, and was just so happy to be soaking up this knowledge about how to cook this steak, and was super stoked to take it home and throw it on the grill. It was just, I don't know, most random thing, but I just thought it was so cool. This NFL quarterback is taking notes on how to cook this steak.
Oh, there was covering baseball a decade ago in spring training. There was a conversation that I caught between a couple of players, and they were talking about shower habits. There was a particular teammate. Why doesn't he use soap? And it ended up kind of be a, and it kind of it.
That's when you get the best stuff.
It was just hearing this conversation. They're like, right? No. So I'm not going to say who it was, but there was a. It was there was a couple of black players and talking about a white player, he doesn't use soap. I don't understand. And and talking about the way they shower. It was hilarious. One of those moments you're like, wow, this is cool. Because I think it was my first year covering a team in a locker room that year. And so it was wow, that's one of those things.
This is how it is.
This is how it is. And now we don't know what that,
I think that. Exactly. I remember we were standing around room? Anthony. We're going all over the place here, but I was asking Anthony Nelson a question, the backup outside linebacker for the Bucs, and he's answering me. But you get that feeling when someone's kind of looking past you while they're talking to you, and he's looking kind of at me, but not at me, and he keeps trying not to smile and laugh, but he can't, and so he's trying to answer my question. But in the middle of it, he keeps stopping to try to stifle a smile over and over. And I'm like, what does this do? Do I have something on my face? Do I have something in my teeth? What is going on? And it wasn't until after the whole thing was done that I turned around and Raheem Nunez Roches, who we call Nacho, who one of the biggest personalities in the game. He's got these awesome gold teeth, and he's just a big, huge ball of energy. I look behind me, and he's been standing on a chair behind, right at eye level, making faces and making fun of, but he's right in my ear. And I'm just like, okay, it's not me. I just want to make sure I wasn't, because Anthony Nelson is staring at me like I'm doing something funny, and I'm just like, I don't get it. So anyway, long tangent about locker room.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Get back to Brady.
But
What was it like knowing that did people believe that Brady was actually retired, or what's kind of the feeling at that point?
I don't know that I could speak for everybody, but I think my feeling through the whole process was never really settled on, is he really not going to play? Like, even after the retirement announcement, it's just kind of like, man, are they really going to roll into the offseason with Gabbert and Trask, like Kyle Trask? Is this how it's going to be? Like, are we going to, but you never really felt like they thought that was the plan either. Like, they always were like,
hey, I feel like we want him back.
I feel like I felt that way because the team felt that way. And, from Bruce to Jason Light, the general manager, who obviously you guys know well. And there was just so much of this, like, he can't really be done. Like, there's not actually going to be, and it goes back to that Rams game part of it. You're like, there's no way he goes out like that. Like, eventually you have to, and we understand that, like, you can't always win the Super Bowl at the end. And when you're Tom Brady,
you're not Peyton Manning or John Elway.
Right. It's hard. It's hard to do that.
It's often more like that. Brett Favre.
I think we all just felt like it just wasn't. And a lot of people feel that way about Rob Gronkowski right now after his announcement yesterday. But like,
his agent suggested it. Come on.
that didn't help. Thanks, Drew. For just
undoing the retirement announcement.
I love it. I love it.
If Tom calls in November, he might come back.
Right. But no, I think the Brady thing was just, it didn't surprise me that he retired. It didn't surprise me when he came back. It doesn't surprise me that he's going to be their quarterback this year. I think what does surprise me is, all the other conspiracy stuff and he's going to play for the 49ers, and he hates Bruce Arians and that's why he retired, and all that, there's so much nonsense that flew around. That's the part of it that bothered me. I think that, what did we have, 40 days to think about whether or not Blaine Gabbert was actually going to be the quarterback? That was 40 days in the wilderness right there. That was excruciating thought process, because again, you look at the rest of the league and the landscape was, okay, well, what if not Brady? What? Because at that point, Russell Wilson, you're thinking, you don't know what's happening with Deshaun Watson, but yeah,
I had Garoppolo pegged there.
Jimmy G, you got Baker Mayfield later in the process. There's so many different options, and then they all kind of started to dry up, and you're like, man, they're not going to have anything here. And so, wow, it was quite a roller coaster. And again, you throw in, the Bruce Arians thing, and then he retires, and then everybody's like, oh yeah, see, I told you, that's the only reason he came back. And it's like, I get it. I get that people want things to be juicier than the truth sometimes, and I completely understand that it's just more fun to believe the lie sometimes, I guess.
So you didn't believe any of, like, obviously Bruce is he's hard on players. He's hard on publicly he will, like, he's both hard and he's super stubborn. But at the same time, Brady has always been very coachable. And now there was the stuff that came out of New England. There was the power struggle with him and Belichick, but did you believe for any minute that Tom Brady was unhappy with Bruce Arians?
Never once. And again, people will see me say that and be like, oh, you just, you're a fanboy. You love the Bucs. You don't want to believe anything's wrong. I mean, go back and look at how I've covered this team, especially when they weren't very good. And when there's something to yell about and something to be mad about that this team does, I will be honest about it. I wasn't thrilled when they signed Antonio Brown. I made my displeasure very apparent there. So it's not like I'm going to carry water for the team here. But I'm just talking about what I see and what I observed being around the team and seeing the way they interacted and watching. Go back to they said the same thing the year before, Jess. They said the same thing when they were 7-5 and, the offense wasn't clicking still halfway through the season. And they were like, oh, it's because, Brady's mad that he criticizes him in the press conferences, as if Brady's a friggin' 12-year-old who doesn't have thick enough skin at this after 22 years in the NFL to be able to take criticism publicly. And like, there was that kind of stuff that bothered me, that people are just like, oh, they said the same thing then and they went and won a Super Bowl together. So it's just like, I think people, again, they would like for the story to be more interesting than the truth, which I believe the truth to be that Brady's retirement decision was its own thing. Yeah. Bruce Arians' retirement decision, which again, you have to go back and look at
Well,
look at the pattern of behavior in Bruce Arians' life and career and his relationship with Todd Bowles, his relationship to his coaches, and how important
a lot about his assistants.
Right. This is stuff I don't have to tell you and your listeners, right? You guys know this stuff. This is why it's so important to him. So
he felt wronged by Mike Tomlin when he was made to retire at Pittsburgh. He was really hurt about that because he felt that Tomlin was going to go in and get him an extension, get him a new contract. So he has always cared deeply about his assistants and his legacy as well. And so when he came out and said, this is the perfect time to go out because you've got a great team. Brady's back. I'm going to hand these over to Todd Bowles, who's capable, and I'm just going to move up, and then my staff stays. My staff stays intact. They have jobs, and they're in a perfect position to be successful. And Arians has cared a lot about his legacy and his assistants especially. He was unhappy. I don't want to say unhappy. He was disappointed when the Cardinals did not hire James Bettcher to basically keep the staff intact there in for 2018.
And so he looked at this and he said it point blank. I saw an opportunity. He said it out loud with the ownership sitting there. He said, I didn't want to give them the opportunity to make a different hire.
Right.
He told them that to their faces in front of all of us. He said, if I stay here and I retire after the year and the whole band breaks up and they get to hire whoever they want. They didn't get to do that this time. I dictated
exactly
where this went. Like whoever has that kind of power, you know what I mean? So, and again, there's so many elements to it. So I think what makes me most aggravated about that whole thing, the conspiracy thing about Brady and the Dolphins and the 49ers and all that stuff, which again, maybe there's some sort of kernel of truth to where if because Brady didn't really deny this part of it when he was asked about it after minicamp, in terms of being involved with the Dolphins, if he stays retired and, Stephen Ross calls him up because they're Michigan men and he wants to own part of the team, like that part makes sense to me. That's the part of it that I could be like, okay, I could see that. You're talking about him. Oh, now we're going to get him and we're going to also get him to play quarterback, which would have taken a 3/4 vote from the owners to approve. And like, okay, now that's outlandish to me. That's kind of far-fetched. And that's really the only part that matters. It seemed like this was all being driven by people who just couldn't fathom that Brady would come back and play for the Bucs again on purpose. And again, we couldn't fathom why he did it in the first place. But like, I just don't know why people needed to believe that Brady doesn't want to be here, that Brady doesn't want to play in Tampa Bay after the experience he's had here, the talent they have here, the chance they have to keep competing for Super Bowls here. I just don't understand what people don't get about that. But it mostly made me angry because I felt like it was overshadowing what Bruce was doing for his staff, for his coaches, totally. for Todd, who is more than deserving of another chance to be a head coach. I feel like that got lost in everybody's need to blame this on Tom Brady. And that's really what kind of pissed me off about it, is that was getting lost underneath all of that. And I think it's something that should have been much more celebrated than it has been.
Absolutely. So in the offseason, so Brady's back. It's now Todd Bowles in charge. Who were the players who were lost in free agency draft, in terms of trades, any of that? Who are the key losses entering this next season? And who was gained in free agency in the draft that should step in and their impact?
All right, so a bit of a different situation than last year, right? They came back after that Super Bowl with the entire starting lineup, all 22, both sides of the ball. All the specialists were back as well, so technically 25. Most of the depth guys, that roster was pretty much intact. They didn't lose a whole lot. Not the case this time. They knew it wasn't going to be able to afford it. You and I were talking about hockey in the pod before the pod. Before the show, and it's similar to what the Tampa Bay Lightning had to do this year, right? They won the cup. They knew they couldn't keep everybody. They pretty much lost their entire third line in free agency. Didn't seem to bother them that much as they're back in the finals again. But the Bucs knew they couldn't keep everybody this time, and that was evident in the fact that they lost some key starters in free agency. Jordan Whitehead, one of their starting safeties, went to the Jets. Alex Kappa, their starting right guard, went to the Bengals. O.J. Howard, a key tight end reserve guy, he went to the Bills. You lost, let's see, who else? Ronald Jones went to Kansas City, even though he was nobody really expected him to come back anyway. He wasn't really living up to the expectations.
Retires.
Right. You've got Gronkowski now who won't be back. He retired. So yeah, that's and the big retirement, honestly, that I feel like everybody has forgotten about to a point is Ali Marpet,
Yeah.
who is one of the best guards in the NFL and was really the most surprising. Everybody was talking about Gronk and Brady and whether they'll come back, and Sue, who obviously won't be back now. But you know, the Ali Marpet loss is a big one, and I think honestly maybe the most important move the Bucs have made in an aggressive move, an offensive move to fill that spot, is getting Shaq Mason from New England for a 5th round pick. I think that may have been the heist of the offseason across the whole league, because that immediately solidifies one of those guard spots and gives you another, I think, Pro Bowl caliber player there. But again, I mentioned Ndamukong Suh, but I'd put him as one of the big losses that they'll have, because he won't be back now that the Bucs have signed. Again, one of their big additions this offseason is Akeem Hicks. They've filled that role, that veteran run stuffing defensive lineman role. So they won't be bringing Sue back now. Obviously they had a draft class that they're expecting big things from. Logan Hall, their top pick, is a defensive lineman as well. More of a pass rushing type of guy that'll probably rotate in as a rookie. Luke Gadecki, their 2nd round pick, probably compete for that left guard spot that was vacated by Ali Marpet. He'll be battling with Aaron Stinney, a guy who has started before for them. Robert Hainsey, a guy they drafted in the 3rd round out of Notre Dame 2 years ago. And then, the other guy that stands out in terms of the additions is Russell Gage. The number 3 receiver in this offense is going to get a lot of targets anyway. And the lack of proven depth at that position was kind of exposed last year at times, and even the year before when some receivers went down. Obviously, you know what you're getting in Mike Evans, but especially with Rob Gronkowski not coming back now, assuming that's the case when we head into week 1 and he hasn't changed his mind. Russell Gage is going to play a huge role in this offense, and it shows by the fact that they gave him $10 million a year over 3 years. And the fact that, again, we still don't know when Chris Godwin is going to be back. Hopefully, obviously, we'd love to have him week 1. But you have a torn ACL and a serious knee injury in December. It's not out of the realm of possibility that he would not be ready, obviously, for the first few games of the season. So Russell Gage basically becomes the number 2 receiver in this offense until Godwin comes back. And if you don't have Gronkowski, that's going to be an even more important role. So expect Mike Evans, obviously, to get more targets if that's the case. But Russell Gage is going to be he's somebody that, again, Tom Brady reached out to personally and went to the team, was like, I want this guy. We need to get this guy. So Brady's not doing that unless he's planning on feeding him the ball quite a bit. So those are really the big ones. Again, Cade Otton, who's a 4th round pick out of Washington, he'll now be a bit more important, I think, in the offense with Gronkowski not coming back. He's that big, athletic, versatile tight end that they'll hope can develop into anywhere near the player Gronk was. Obviously, he was kind of a unicorn, but that's kind of what they need him to be in this offense now, a guy that can do it all. So yeah, I mean, that's the rest of everybody is pretty much back. They've got a lot of key starters back at key positions. The two additions that I think could make the biggest difference on defense, they went and got 2 really good, cheap veterans in Logan Ryan and Keanu Neal, who bring athleticism, intelligence, the ability to communicate because of their experience in multiple defenses. Logan Ryan can play safety, can play in the slot, can play corner. Keanu Neal's played linebacker and safety at this level. Those 2 guys coming in and giving more veteran experience to a pretty young secondary still, I think is going to make a huge difference for how consistently this defense is able to play well.
Question on Logan Hall. Do you see him, because he was a guy that the Cardinals really liked as well, and my co-host Seth, he's talked about what his future is. Do you see him playing more interior defensive end, or out in that outside linebacker position?
He's definitely an interior guy. And again, it's hard, today's NFL, there's not really a whole lot of 3-4 and 4-3 teams. There's nobody really plays a straight base 3-4 or 4-3 anymore. It's a lot of hybrid stuff. It's a lot of under and over fronts, and everybody's moving around. And honestly, every defense is in nickel plus every play now.
And so it's a 4 down.
There's not really any.
It's a 4-man front, pretty much.
Exactly. So in that alignment, he's going to be an interior guy. He's already beefed up, I think, to around 290. I think he said, which again, you're not putting your guy out in space at that size. So he's going to be a 3-tech, I think, in this defense. And again, he's got a similar build to William Golston, who's been in Tampa for about a decade now. But I think I think Will would admit he's a better athlete. He's a more explosive guy. And Will Golston has been a quality starter in Tampa Bay for a long, long time. And I think if you're telling me I'm getting that guy, but with better athleticism, better pass rush moves, and more potential, That's worth the number 33 pick to me. And by all accounts, he's looked great in camp. Warren Sapp was down at training camp for a while, or down at mini camp, and said he liked what he saw as well. So I think that's going to be a really important pick for this team, even with the addition of Akeem Hicks. I think you've got Hicks and Vita Vea eating up all that space on the early downs, on running downs. And if you're able to put, Shaq Barrett, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who will be a full-time starter now. We didn't even mention Jason Pierre-Paul, who obviously won't be back. They gave Logan Hall number 90, so that's when we knew that JPP definitely wouldn't be coming back. But we're expecting big things out of him in his second year after being a first-round pick last year. But yeah, Logan Hall is going to make a difference, because this defense, we knew that interior of that defense needed to get more athletic, more explosive, and needed to get after the quarterback and push that pocket from the inside to help out those guys on the outside like Shaq Barrett. And I think that's exactly what they got. They got the perfect fit there in Logan Hall.
Kind of like what the Cardinals had in Calais Campbell. Not quite as tall, but I see him be able to do some of the same things that Calais did in that position for the Cardinals back in the day, before he went full-time edge and, when he got paid $15 million a year from the Jaguars and then exploded as a pass rusher.
Yeah, and again, you're talking about unicorns. I mean, not a lot of people are as big as Calais Campbell and can do what he can do on the edge and live in space like that at that size. That dude is he's one of a kind.
He is. So, coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's now look ahead to the 2022 season, expectations, and how they perhaps match up with the Cardinals. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We've talked about kind of the offseason additions, the offseason subtractions, obviously slightly different coachings, new head coach, quarterbacks back. What are sort of the expectations for Tampa going forward? I look at the NFC South and I see that the Bucs should be the prohibitive favorites to come out of the division, and Panthers, not good. Falcons, not good. Saints, we don't know. I see the Saints as a team that will maybe compete for the wild card, but I don't love what they are yet, and so they have a pretty perceived easy route out of the division.
Yeah, I think it'll be similar to last year, right? Where the Falcons might be the worst team in the whole league in terms of the overall level of talent on the roster. The Panthers might not be far off. They got a couple of players here and there, but I don't think either of those teams will compete.
Sam Darnold's their starter, come on.
Yeah. I'd roll with Matt. I'd go Matt Corral from day one if I had to over Sam Darnold. I'd just rather run with the rookie and see what happens. But the Saints are an interesting thing, because I don't know that it matters who plays for the Saints. Right now, the Bucs have a mental block when they play that team that is just insurmountable at this point. Tom Brady has 0 for 4 against them in the regular season since he came to Tampa. Obviously, they got the one that mattered in the playoffs, right? And we'll make that trade all day long. But I mean, the Saints haven't just beaten the Bucs; they've embarrassed the Bucs multiple times, blowing them out at home on national TV in the Super Bowl season, and then shutting them out 9-0 in the same exact scenario the year after. I mean, the Bucs have to get over that hump, and they're going to have to do it for me to believe it. I think, again, the Saints are a mediocre team on paper right now. You don't really know what Jameis Winston is going to give them over 16 games, 17 games as a starter. You don't know if Alvin Kamara is going to start to wear out from all the touches he's gotten at offense. You don't know so much. Like you said, you just don't know. They've got some pieces on defense. I think they'll still be one of the better defenses in the league. Dennis Allen knows what he's doing with that group. But you just don't know. I think if they sweep the Bucs in the regular season again, but also miss the playoffs and the Bucs win the NFC South by a decent margin again, I don't think that's surprising to me, because again, until they can prove they can beat them, I have to believe it when I see it. But the rest of that division is so weak, and I think that as long as the Bucs can at least split some of those road games and some of those tough home matchups, they've got a much tougher schedule this year. I still think they'll be able to win that division comfortably and head into the playoffs with a home game.
And I feel that way about the kind of each division in the NFC, that I feel that there is a clear favorite with a handful of teams that are kind of in the mix. So got the Rams again in the NFC West, got the Packers, you got the Cowboys, you got the Bucks, and then you've got teams like the Cardinals and the Eagles and the Vikings and the 49ers. I actually don't love the 49ers this year as much as I did last year, because Shanahan is 8-28 with anyone other than Jimmy Garoppolo. So I don't know. The betting people, they love the 49ers. I don't get it. Trey Lance.
You can have them. You can have them.
Trey Lance, he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to come out in year 2 and do what Mahomes did. It's just not going to happen. But I feel like that the Cardinals are potentially at the top end of those wild card teams. As we look at the Cardinals and Bucs facing each other late in the year, what is the perception? What is your view of what the Cardinals have to offer in terms of competition with the Bucs? I'm not asking for a prediction. That's too late. They're playing on Christmas, so way too early.
Right. Well, I think particularly on defense, I think the biggest thing that I see is the fact that Chandler Jones isn't going to be there. And I think that if I'm Tom Brady, I'm really happy about that. I'm a guy who needs a clean pocket to do what I do, and Chandler Jones is a guy who has been a huge problem for quarterbacks during his time, his whole career. So the fact that I'm not going to have to deal with him is a big issue out of the way. Obviously, there's some athleticism, some versatility in that defense. Budda Baker, I think, is one of the most underrated defenders in the entire league. So he's a guy that I think Brady's going to always have to find him, similar to the way he would have to do it with Tyrann Mathieu when they played the Chiefs. And again, the Saints beat the Bucs on defense really well because they run this double robber most of the time, where they basically just unleash their safeties to follow Brady's eyes, follow Gronk, follow Godwin, whoever he thinks are going to be the primary target, and kind of let those guys free roam. The Cardinals have that guy in Budda Baker and can let him kind of do those things. So they have the personnel to, I think, give Brady a few problems here and there. I just don't see them having enough in terms of the coverage and the pass rush up front to be able to make his life as miserable as you need to beat the Bucs. And then on defense, it's really about what defense shows up for the Bucs, because I think on paper they have the horses at every level to handle the best of what the Cardinals do. And again, when you're playing a quarterback like Kyler Murray, you'd better have linebackers who can run. And I don't know if there's a better set of linebackers when it comes to athleticism and range and sideline to sideline ability than what the Bucs have in Devin White and Lavonte David. So, you've obviously got the guys that can contain him as best you can. And it's just about making him make decisions. You want to make him look like the worst version of himself that we saw at times last year, instead of the MVP version we saw when they were undefeated halfway through the season. So I think, again, the Bucs have all of those advantages on paper, but they have to execute. If they're not, disciplined in their gap integrity, if they're not disciplined in keeping Kyler Murray contained and not letting him break the pocket and make plays on the run, they've got the explosive playmaking ability to make you pay. So I think, again, as long as the Bucs play to their potential, I like them in that game, even on the road. But again, they've got to play like they can, or the Cardinals have the playmakers to expose them if they don't.
I see the Bucs as somewhere between an 11 to 14 win team and a team with a title ceiling. They should be in the mix for a title this year. Would that be roughly what you would expect out of this team coming up in 2022?
Absolutely. And I think within that building, it's nothing less than a Super Bowl. And obviously you have to look at it a little more critically than that and say, well, you're going to be breaking in a new left guard, a new right guard. You don't have Gronk at tight end. You're not going to have Godwin week 1 probably. So you're breaking in a new receiver 2 in Russell Gage. There's going to be some moving pieces there that you're going to have to acclimate to and may not be as smooth as you had last year. And last year's schedule was a bit easier. Again, that's all on paper based on last year, and we know how things can change. But right now, that schedule looks rough, especially right out the gate. They've got some really tough matchups, 2 straight road games. They come back home, and they've got the Packers and the Chiefs. I mean, it's going to be a tough start. I think that might help them in the long run, where they're going to get tested early, and even if it goes like they don't want it to, and maybe they come out of that 2-2, maybe even 1-3, I think facing all those really good teams early will beat them up a little bit and get them seasoned and ready to go down the stretch. I think they have a nice mid-season bye week that, again, it feels like the kind of season where it could be more like 2020, where it starts a little rough, but down the stretch they kind of find their groove and hopefully get hot again. But yeah, the Super Bowl is absolutely the goal and maybe even the expectation for most Bucs fans.
All right. That is Luke Easterling from BucsWire.com and also DraftWire.com. He covers both sites for the USA Today NFL Wire. Luke, social media, anywhere else that my listeners can follow you?
Yeah, man, I keep it pretty simple on social media. It's just at Luke Easterling on Twitter, obviously at the Draft Wire, at the Bucks Wire for the site accounts there. And yeah, that's pretty much all I do.
All right, man. I appreciate the time. We'll have to talk again. We'll see how things turn out Christmas night. That's, again, Luke Easterling from Bucks Wire and from Draft Wire. Thanks for listening. We will move on to our next segment.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we move on to our segment about the Atlanta Falcons, our final NFC South opponent preview. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red.
Next up on our opponent preview series for the Rise Up Sea Red podcast are the Atlanta Falcons, whom the Cardinals play in the second to last week of the regular season in Week 17 on the road. The last time they faced the Falcons was in 2019 in Kyler Murray's rookie season, one of the 3 straight wins they rattled off there before the first half of the season wrapped up. But we're not here to talk about that 2019 game. We're here to look at the Falcons last season and their offseason and what we're looking forward to in the upcoming year. And for that, I've got Matt Urban, the managing editor from thefalconswire.com, which is the sister site on our USA Today NFL Wire that covers the Falcons. Matt, thanks for joining the show. Glad to have you on. Well, by the time this is not going to be published right away, we're recording on a Saturday at the end of June, and yeah, so it's hot here. It sounds like it's hot where you're at. So we're just finding ways to keep cool. How you been?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking some Falcons football, man. We got a busy offseason here. A lot more than the past couple of years combined, I feel like.
Yeah, and so last year it's an interesting team. If you look at how their season went, they had 7 wins. They had 7 wins last year, finishing 7-10. It was the 4th season in a row that they finished under 500. And obviously, but they were a 7-win team with a point differential of minus 146.
That's right.
How is that possible even?
Honestly, that is like a great question. And honestly, that's one of the first things I point at. Everyone says, they won 7 games. If you watch those games, man, it was like they won the 7 games barely, and then they lost. They really lost. You saw the Patriots game on Monday Night Football. I think it was Thursday night. They didn't score a point, and their offense throughout the stretches of the season was just absolutely the worst thing I've ever seen. But yeah, I mean, it's like they did find a way to squeak out a couple wins. So it's like it's encouraging because they didn't have a great talent base there last year, and obviously Arthur Smith's first year coming in, a lot changing. No Julio Jones first time. And Calvin Ridley, all that stuff happened. He's kind of has a missing year. He leaves for personal issues, and it was all just kind of a crazy up and down season. Matt Ryan just barely hung on in there. It was the kind of year that it's definitely the first year for Arthur Smith. There's a lot of good things. There's a lot of things that you just were like, oh man, he's got to get that fixed up. He's supposed to be an offensive guy, and they're not doing much here and there. But overall, I think there's like a clear direction of the team now going into the second year. Especially like after a mandatory minicamp, I think that they have more of an idea of what he's going for,
Yeah.
This year.
What went well for them last year, and then what was obvious, and then what were the problems ultimately?
Right. So I think what went well is mostly just Cordell Patterson. I mean, he was kind of just a revelation. The Falcons haven't had a running game in 3-4 years at all, really any kind of consistent running game, and all of a sudden, not that they were great running the ball last year, but Patterson kind of gave them just that ability to run the ball a little bit again, respect the run game a little bit. So yeah, they got they're more of a physical team, I think. But really not much to say good about them overall as a defense. Like I felt like they were scrappy, they hung in there a lot of games. They kept it close, but they just didn't have the dogs. The players were not there. And throughout most of the season, pretty much all the games were close, and it just really, really got away from them. And so I think going into the second year, there's a lot of areas they should be better at, but a lot they did well last year, honestly. I mean, yeah, passing the ball, throwing the ball, stopping the run, stopping the pass. They were pretty much at the bottom of any of those categories we look at it.
Well, they did have a couple of bright spots offensively. You mentioned one, Cordell Patterson,
Kyle Pitts,
long time in the NFL, and fantastic returner. Has always underwhelmed as a receiver. and put him in a running back role, and guess what? He was really great. And then then the other guy that you watch is Kyle Pitts. How good was he as a rookie?
He was good. He had a couple of really good games, really promising games. I think the London game against the Jets, he went for like 150 yards, and he definitely looks really promising, but it wasn't quite as, impressive of a season game to game as you would have thought. He had one touchdown. He was kind of brought in to be a red zone threat, and they didn't really figure that out last year, but definitely got a crazy upside. And, a lot of it was more just the offensive line was so bad last year. Like they couldn't, it was Matt Ryan had half a second. And when he did, there was no even the receivers he was throwing to were, his fourth and fifth guys going into the year. So it was just kind of a big mess in terms of that. But Pitts definitely was a bright spot. Really fast, really athletic. Kind of really played well, lining up outside a little bit. I know people thought that he was kind of just in general pass catcher, not a true tight end. But yeah, I think overall going into this year, he looks like a really solid core piece that they're going to go on using a lot this year.
You talked about Arthur Smith. What is the feeling of him as a head coach, especially after 1 year and having a very interesting year to say the least? How do people feel about Arthur Smith moving forward?
I'd say they're right in the middle right now. The record over time has kind of brought people back. During the season, I think people were pretty down on him throughout watching the games, but 7-10 record overall. He's kind of I wouldn't say a shy guy, but he's not like the most outspoken kind of guy. So he was definitely a little uncomfortable throughout the year, talking to the media, getting used to all that kind of stuff. And the team seems to be behind him, though. I think he kind of was a little more confident seeming this year. He's a better, clear vision of what he's trying to do. Like last year, they're dealing with so much, turmoil of, trying to go from this pass-heavy team to this run-first system without the players to do it whatsoever. They have a couple good offensive linemen and Chris Lindstrom and, Jake Matthews, obviously. But the rest of it has just been, really, really poor and turning over a lot. So I think it was a solid year for him. He got 7 wins. It was the most they've had in a couple of years before that. They had 4 wins the previous year. And you could say they had a worse team last year than they did the previous year. So I think overall, I would say it was like a successful first year. But fans are definitely want to wait and see approach with him a little bit, I think, too.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, we're going to talk about the Falcons offseason. Who did they lose? Who did they trade? Who did they gain? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. And let's talk about obviously the biggest thing that they did in the offseason was the decision to move on from Matt Ryan. Did you feel at this point in his career, was it time to move on?
Personally, yes. I've been of that thought for about 2 years, and it's not because I'm not a great fan of Matt Ryan. I have great respect for what he does, what he's done here. But his contract has been eating this team up, for the past couple of years, and they kind of just keep kicking the can down the road. They kept just, renegotiating his deal, pushing the money down, and then his cap hit has been, hurting them for years in a row. And it's why they haven't been able to add any free agents past few seasons. I think it's right. They made the right move here, kind of just like taking the hit. He's got like a $64 million dead cap hit or something total. And so I think they're doing the right thing here. It might be, a bit of a transition, but Matt Ryan deserved to play on a better team. He's been, I think it's going to be a little bit of a Matt Stafford situation where the fans will probably see him doing well on the Colts and also be happy about, a new day in Atlanta. Because if you watch them the past few years, it's not like Ryan he's been a solid quarterback. He's been really good. His lack of mobility with the way the team is structured with the offensive line, the middle of it being so weak, it's been kind of just a disaster. So I think he deserves a situation like the Colts where they have, they're solid up front and good running game and everything. And I think, so ultimately, I think it was the right move. It just, it's a tough decision to make. Obviously, the guy's been here for 13 years and fans love the guy and former MVP. But yeah, I think it was the right move ultimately.
And that leads us to the quarterback change, which is instead of drafting a quarterback in the first round, now we'll talk about their draft in just a moment, but they moved to Marcus Mariota, a guy that Arthur Smith is familiar with and comfortable with. What is the feeling about Marcus Mariota entering 2022 in terms of how he can lead the team? Is he pretty much the guaranteed starter? Is there a competition between him and Desmond Ridder?
Yeah, I think I think the idea with the general thought process around Mariota is it's cautious optimism. I think that I assume he's going to be the starter. I wouldn't say it's like in stone, but Arthur Smith tends to be a little bit. He tends to be a little bit tentative with rookies. Like he didn't play Richie Grant much last season, the second round pick. So I kind of have a hard time seeing that Ritter's going to go out there and be the starter week one. But I wouldn't, rule him out getting him on the field at some point. Last year they ran Felipe Franks was their number 2 quarterback, and he's kind of a run first guy. And Arthur Smith liked to throw packages with him out there to kind of mix it up a bit. So I think he'll probably get on the field. But Mariota, it seems like it's going to be his first shot here, and obviously he has a past with Arthur Smith. They were together in Tennessee, and Arthur Smith actually kind of I wouldn't say he gave up on him, but he was the guy that benched him in favor of Tannehill. And but obviously the relationship was fine because they mended it and he signed here. But I think people are wondering if they can kind of have if Arthur Smith can kind of have a similar situation here with Mariota as he did with Tannehill, because Tannehill was also a top pick, and a little bit, he was on a second opportunity. So, I think it's probably Mariota's team so far, but I'm not going to rule out Ritter getting in there.
If we look at the players that the Falcons lost, obviously Matt Ryan is the big one. That's a big transition when you go from a more than a decade-long franchise quarterback who is aging. Eventually, you have to cut ties. But the other surprise was, I'm sure Falcons were expecting a return of Calvin Ridley, only to find out that he got suspended for the year for betting on football while he was away from the team. How impactful is that loss? Or better yet, was he going to be moved? And so this was just a case where they lost out on some sort of compensation for him?
Yeah, that seems like what they were kind of indicating once the suspension came out, that they had offers on the table for Ridley and had been planning to move him, it seemed like. But what gets lost in all that is that when he was on the field last season, he wasn't a great fit in the system. I don't know if it was whatever was going on with him off the field, but he was not effective last season when he was on the field. And so once he left, they never really said what it was for. It was just a personal leave. I don't know if he said he was going to get his mental health together or something like that. But so I don't think he was in the long-term plans, and it sounded like they're going to trade him. So now it's kind of an interesting situation because his contract just gets pushed to next year. So I don't know if they're going to, maybe they reset and kind of see how things are going with him, or they just look to move him immediately or what. But it's kind of complicated there with Ridley for sure.
Who else were impact losses, whether they've been cut, losses in free agency or whatnot?
Okay, for sure. Definitely number 1, Foye Oluokun, middle linebacker. He led the league in tackles last year. Really good player that's developed, as a 6th round pick out of Yale, I think. Really good player. He signed with the Jags over the offseason. And then Russell Gage, who was kind of de facto number 1 receiver last year, signed with Tampa Bay. And, that's a pretty big loss too. And that's really the main two. And then Ridley, obviously. And then Dante Fowler. He was released, but he technically didn't. It was like the contract was not actually 2 years. It was like a 1-year deal.
It had a void.
Yeah, right. Had void thing, right?
Okay.
So that's a loss, but that was kind of expected. So overall, they pretty much got rid of everyone, and they didn't re-sign many guys, and they brought in a few big names. Once they got a little cash, they brought in. I don't know if you want to do that after this or not, but
go ahead. That leads right in exactly what's next.
Okay, cool, yeah. So they traded for Brian Edwards, receiver from the Raiders, who's kind of looks like an up-and-coming guy. They got traded for a 5th round pick, and they gave up a 7th. And it looks like he's going to be a starter probably. And then they signed Rashaan Evans, middle linebacker out of Tennessee. He's figured to be a starter, replacing Oluokun. And then what else I guess here? Oh, Lorenzo Carter, the edge out of Giants, free agent from the Giants, former Georgia Bulldog. He signed here, 1-year deal. And mostly the draft picks draft's going to play a huge role too, I think.
Yeah. A couple other names that to bring up are Casey Hayward, a guy, but got to stay healthy. Damiere Byrd is a familiar name for Cardinals fans. He was here in Arizona. He's fast, so he can give you something.
But you look at that wide receiver core. You've got, so is Gage is gone. Who is your number? As we talk about Drake
number
London,
one receiver.
Yeah. So
Right.
Who is
Yeah,
who? We'll talk about Drake London in just a second. But before the draft, what did that receiver core look like? What did it look like for the starting receivers?
Right. It was bare. I did a lineup projection before the draft, and I was just looking at it, actually. I had Auden Tate, who was another free agent signing they got, who's got like very little experience, and Edwards obviously being there now, but before they traded for Edwards, I mean, I think I had Bird in there at one point. I mean, there's so little. Olamide Zacchaeus, he resigned resigned his tender. He'll be back. He's the slot receiver, but yeah, in terms of like a starting 1 and 2, they had nothing. I mean, they had nobody knew. It was anyone's guess at that point. Auden Tate and Demir Bird. So, Bird is probably not a number 1 or number 2. So
let's go to the draft, because that's where they made some hay. Obviously,
right.
Now at number 8 overall, they go with Drake London out of USC. I actually, and maybe this was a little optimistic, but I thought that they might actually go after Jameson Williams. Was the injury ultimately was the reason why they went with London over Williams? I love Drake London, having as an Arizona State guy, I see a lot of Pac-12 football. I've got season tickets to the Devils, and Drake London, it was a couple of years ago that absolutely crushed dreams of the Sun Devils. Do you feel like he moves well enough to be impactful in the NFL?
That's a great question, and that was my main apprehension with him being drafted there too, because I also like Jameson Williams. I think the injury probably did play a role in that, because I mean he was clear cut number 1 guy, I think, going into the draft in most of our minds, at least for that injury in the championship game. So but Drake London, I understood the pick. He was one of my early projections to the Falcons. He makes a lot of sense. He was a clear, a healthy player at a position of great need. But also, they are, probably a year or 2 away. So I would have been okay with taking the long-term approach for a guy like, Williams or something. But yeah, London, he's obviously a big target, great catch radius. But can he create separation? I mean, that's what people are saying. I don't really know his particular 40 time. I don't believe he ran at the combine.
He did not, because he was recovering from, I can't remember, it was an ankle or a hamstring that he was recovering from.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the question. I mean, I think overall, other than the speed, concerns, so I don't know if they're even concerns, but other than that, I feel like he looks like a solid, top 10 prospect. It makes sense. He makes sense for the Falcons. I just, I think that, there's other directions to go there. And there was a pretty deep receiver class, as we were talking about. So, I mean, I was okay with them going in a different direction potentially, but London, I understand the pick. But yeah, we'll see what he can do. He's probably going to enter the season as number 1 receiver, so we'll find out right away.
Right. So that's a young core of Drake London at receiver and Kyle Pitts as well. So that Mariota will definitely have some young guys to throw to. I really like the first 4 picks and 5 of the picks overall. Actually, 5 or 6 of them, because Arnold Ebiketie. He is an athletic freak. They get him at number 38 overall out of Penn State. How, do you hope, or do you think that he can be an impactful pass rusher even in year 1? And how badly does that defense need him?
They really need him, and I do think so, because they last year they were dealing with they changed from a 4-3 to a 3-4 last year, and they brought in Dean Pease, and nobody really was on the roster that he drafted, or anybody that they kind of had in mind long term for that. So I think these are the first real guys they get to really put their hands on, like Ebiketie, and then also the other kid they took out of Western Kentucky. But yeah, D'Angelo Malone. I think honestly Ebiketie has a great chance to start. I don't really see who would keep him out of it. They could potentially go with Aid Ogundiji, who could potentially start at one of the spots along with Lorenzo Carter. But I think Ebiketie's got a chance to start, and if not, he'll be out there for sure. I mean, they love him so far. They moved up, a few spots to get him, not many, but I think a lot of people were thinking they might go Malik, Willis there, and they clearly really like the guy a lot and are excited as hell to get him. So yeah, I think he's got a chance to play a lot this year.
And then Troy Anderson out of Montana State, small school, but an athletic prospect. Desmond Ridder in the 3rd round, that was impressive. Yeah. Of the quarterbacks in this draft class, I think I like him the best. I know it was a weak quarterback class.
Right,
Willis might have the best upside. but Ritter having played at a high level at a big program with the athleticism that he has,
pro ready, right?
Do you think that they view him potentially as the guy that they're going to move to, or is that just a maybe, hopefully?
Yeah, it's a great question because, did they just think, if they really wanted him, would they have taken him a little earlier? Because, to hope he's going to fall in your lap in the third round is probably unlikely. So, I mean, I kind of felt like they just, they're like, all right, we can't pass on Ritter at this point at 74 overall. But I do think they like him a lot. And I think he's got a great chance to be a long-term guy. But it depends on, if he gets on the field this year. If he doesn't, then say if they're in a top 5 pick position again next year, they have a quarterback sitting there. They're going to, back on Ritter, or they're going to just, punch on the new guy. So I think it creates a good competition. Sorry, my dog's sneaking up on me here a little bit. Yeah, so it's an interesting situation. I like Ritter's long-term chances, and I think they do too. But just like I said, wait until the third to get the guy you want. And maybe it's Russell Wilson, but I don't know if you're going to back on that guy. But if he gets on the field, I think that really helps his chances. Show what he can do, and kind of give them some stability in that position, because I think Mariota can hold it down for a year or two. I'm not sure. He hasn't played in 2 years. He wasn't terrible when he got benched in the first place. I looked a little back at his time in Tennessee. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think he's got a shot, but I wouldn't, guarantee they don't take a quarterback in the top 5 next year if they're that bad or something.
Tyler Algier is another intriguing prospect, a guy that I've watched a bit of. I do watch some BYU football. I think he's. I think he will be a guy who fans will really enjoy because of the way he plays the game. Not super fast, but physical and can do a lot of different things. He was basically BYU's offense the last couple. Well, especially last year after Zach Wilson left, he was the offense for BYU.
Oh yeah.
And so
I think he had 23 touchdowns last year. Was it?
It was
21?
It was ridiculous. He had all the yards and all the touchdowns for the Cougars. Justin Schaefer out of Georgia is not a bad pick late in the 6th round. But if you look at the top to bottom of that draft class, obviously you're expecting an impact from Drake London, Arnold Ebiketie. Where do you expect to see any sort of impact or role at all this year from the rest of the class?
That's a good question. I think what you were saying earlier with Anderson, that's kind of right now it's a little bit of a convoluted position at middle linebacker there. They got Deion Jones, who they're not really, who he could be out of the picture soon. We don't really know for sure. They seem to approach the offseason like he's not going to be here. Yeah, they signed Nick Kwiatkowski, and they obviously Rashaan Evans, and they drafted Anderson. So, I mean, I don't think Deion Jones is in their minds is in the picture, but I think Anderson, if Deion Jones is out of the picture, I think he's got a chance to, I don't know if he's going to start, but I think he'll play a big role there because he's versatile. He can play multiple spots up front. Beyond that, D'Angelo Malone, really, really a good natural pass rusher. I think he'll get on the field too a bit, even if it's situationally. I think that's a guy that fans will really like watching. He had like 180 career pressures at Western Kentucky. And last season they were starting, 2 guys, Stephen Means, who's a good player. He's not a starting edge rusher. So obviously I think they have a better group overall, but I think Malone can get on the field. And then Schaefer should provide some depth there. They at left guard, they have Jalen Mayfield, who did not have a good rookie year. And then also center Matt Hennessy. So both those guys are kind of, not solidified starters. So I think Schaefer should give some competition at guard at least. But overall, I think it's a solid class. That'll probably be the last one that I would say would have an impact.
And then coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's now talk about the expectations and hopes for the Falcons 2022 season. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. Still talking to Matt Urban from thefalconswire.com, managing editor over there. We've talked about what the Falcons season was. We looked at their offseason, and now let's look ahead to the coming season. Odds makers are not optimistic at all. They project this team to be bad. What is, for you, kind of the floor and the ceiling for this team, and what would be a reasonable expectation out of the Falcons this season?
Right. So I think if you look at last season, they won 7 games. Overall, they've improved in, I would say, most positions, at least a little bit. And going into the year, I think 7 wins again is probably 7-8 wins is about what I expect. I think their floor is around about 5 or 6, and I think they could maybe win 10, 11 games if they get the right breaks. Thinking that they won 7 last year and that huge point differential as we talked about. But yeah, so my prediction in my official our schedule release thing was I believe it was 8 and 9.
That's not bad. I mean, and if they won 7 games, as long as it's a 7-10 record, that is a much more competitive.
Exactly.
7-10 record. But it's kind of interesting because I think Mariota could, I guess it's going to come down to kind of what Mariota does, right? Because they have the weapons offensively. It's just a matter of does Mariota, does he produce? Or does it sort of stagnate? Because obviously it looks like on defense you're still really young, and defensively it could still be a rocky season. But between the running game and then now adding that, and I think probably the passing game will probably be up and down as well. But with
sure.
Pitts and London, I think you have yourself a reasonable set. Now, the Cardinals will come to town. We'll head to Atlanta at the end of December.
17?
Yeah, it's week 17, the second to last week. How do Falcons feel about that matchup? If they see that game, is that a game that they expect to win, think is a toss-up, or is one that they would have to sneak a win, or either sneak or it would be a clear upset?
I think for me, it looks like a clear loss to me. I mean, I know you guys kind of finished the year tough, but at that point, I believe you would have DeAndre Hopkins back, right? He's got 6 games.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was what I was thinking when I predicted that game. Yeah, I think it's it's the kind of game that they could obviously win. I think Dean Pease does a pretty good job with mobile quarterbacks, so I wouldn't rule out keeping it close. But yeah, I think the Cardinals are probably a little bit underrated at this moment because they finished the season on such a dud. I've watched those final few games, and then being a Michigan guy, I was kind of a Stafford fan, so I followed them, followed the Rams a little bit. So I probably watched all the games against Cardinals, and yeah, I mean, I saw how good they were at certain points, and I think that how they kind of ended the season, people a little bit writing them off, and I personally am not doing that, so I have them losing that game for sure.
All right. So again, that is Matthew Urban from thefalconswire.usatoday.com, our sister site that covers the Falcons for the NFC South. Matt, aside from the site itself, are there other ways that my listeners can interact with you, follow your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Urban, and I don't have a podcast currently, possibly in the works here, but yeah, right then, just Twitter, I guess. Also, check out my guy Dean Worley, my contributor. He's a pretty good follow on Falcons Follow. Let me read you his Twitter. I think it's just at Dean Worley. Let me just double check for you. But yeah, man, really appreciate you having me on and everything. Looking forward to the season here. Let's see.
It's we're getting really close. The training camp is now about a month away from. So I think the 26th. Well, the Cardinals veterans report on the 26th. So it's just a few weeks away instead of this part of the off season.
For sure. I was gonna say one thing I did want to come back to a little bit. I just thought of it now is fans were a little bit angry about the passing on to Kobe Dean, who kind of fell down there, and Georgia guy.
Yeah.
They were really when they took Anderson. I meant to say this earlier. Yeah, they kind of nobody really heard of Anderson in terms of the Falcons fan base kind of thing, and so that was a big contentious point at the time. But I think people have come around to Troy Anderson.
Right, that makes sense because obviously they're in Georgia.
Yeah.
That Georgia defense was incredible. Now I know Kobe Dean, he fell quite a bit in the draft.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it came down to medicals. And while he was currently healthy, I think he had to deal with a ton of little things that kind of scared fans away because, if he stays healthy, you have to feel like he's going to be an impact player because
he was a top 15 projection. I think most people.
Yes,
had him. I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely.
And being a Falcons, Georgia Falcons fans, I mean, obviously they really love the guy. So, I mean, just in the second round,
I experience it here. Now, the difference is that the Georgia program is so much better than the Arizona State program. But anytime that an Arizona State guy is a concept is a potential pick, Eno Benjamin, running back that we've got on the roster, drafted in 2020, played at Arizona State and was drafted in the 7th round. And fans here they want him to be great. Now, there's some great comments from Cliff Kingsbury that this offseason looks like he could be a starting running back. He's not going to be a starting running back, and
not so bad.
They're like, yeah, finally. But no, I'm like, when it comes to local, like your local college stars, the players there, fans locally are irrational about them. And
it's insane.
I love Eno. I'm a huge Arizona State fan, so I want him to succeed. I'm just like, come on, no. While Cliff said he looks like he could be a starting running back, he's not gonna be. They just gave James Conner a 3-year contract.
Right. Yeah, I mean, honestly, Falcons fans think they have something against the University of Georgia, honestly. Ever since I've been here, they're like, I guarantee they won't take a Georgia guy. And this year, obviously, of all years, that having the championship run and such as loaded defense and players all over, they were just like, I guarantee they don't take a Georgia guy. And they took they did take 2 back-to-back in the draft, but kind of guys that bubble guys anyway. So, but so that's kind of how it is in Georgia here, down there in Georgia with all those guys and Dean for sure. Yeah, I mean, they were just going nuts about not taking Nakobe Dean, but there's got to be. I feel like what you're saying, like there's got to be some kind of injury issue there because I don't feel like every team passes on him. How far did he fall?
He was picked
3rd round.
Yeah, it was the 3rd round. I can't remember who because I was just doing a preview show with the team that got him, and I can't remember where he landed. Let me check.
I think it was Eagles. It was Eagles, right?
Yes, it was the Eagles, and they were really happy to get him because they've been looking for a line. Sure. They've been looking for an impact linebacker basically since Jordan Hicks left.
Right.
So yeah. That'll wrap up this segment of our preview show with Matthew Urban. Again, the FalconsWire.com. Did you find your contributor's Twitter?
Yes, I did. Let's come back to that. Sorry. Yeah. So my buddy Dean Worley, his Twitter is @Dean_NFL.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, Matt. And that wraps up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Best of Cardinals Talk on the web, episode 363. That was Matt Urban from FalconsWire.com. I'm Jess Root from CardsWire.com. Our next edition will come later this week, which will wrap up in the 6th and final installment of the opponent preview series for the Cardinals' 3 second-place games, as it will face the Eagles, the Vikings, and the New England Patriots in 2022. We will have interviews to preview those 3 opponents, and we'll be back next week with a regular show with Seth Cox as we rank the NFC West and get ready for training camp, which is in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.